Tonight, tensions over Iran's nuclear program are once again at the center of global attention. In a defiant and carefully worded statement, Iran's top leadership has declared that no country has the authority to deprive the Islamic Republic of what it calls its nuclear enrichment rights. The message was clear, direct, and aimed not only at domestic audiences, but at Washington, European capitals, and regional rivals watching closely as diplomatic efforts stall and rhetoric sharpens. The question facing the world is this: are we witnessing a renewed push toward confrontation or the opening moves of another high-stakes negotiation? The statement comes amid mounting pressure from the United States and its allies who argue that Iran's expanding uranium enrichment activities exceed the limits agreed under the 2015 nuclear deal. That agreement, formerly known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, was designed to curb Iran's nuclear capabilities in exchange for sanctions relief. It was negotiated between Iran and six world powers: the United States, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Russia, and China. After years of complex diplomacy, at the heart of this renewed standoff is a fundamental dispute over rights and trust. Iranian officials insist that uranium enrichment for peaceful purposes is permitted under international law, specifically the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Tehran maintains that as a signatory to the treaty, it has the right to develop nuclear technology for civilian energy production, medical research, and scientific advancement. Iranian leaders argue that their program is transparent and subject to inspections by the International Atomic Energy Agency, the United Nations nuclear watchdog. However, Western governments remain deeply skeptical. They point to Iran's enrichment of uranium to levels far beyond what is typically required for civilian nuclear power. Under the 2015 deal, Iran agreed to limit enrichment to 3.67%, 67% purity, suitable for nuclear energy, but far below weapons grade. In recent years, inspectors have confirmed enrichment levels reaching 60% purity, which, while still short of weapons grade, is significantly closer to the threshold needed for a nuclear weapon. Iran insists these steps are reversible and were taken in response to what it calls unlawful actions by the United States. In 2018, then-President Donald Trump announced that the United States would withdraw from the nuclear agreement and reimpose sweeping economic sanctions. Washington argued that the deal was flawed, that it failed to address Iran's ballistic missile program, and that it did not permanently prevent Tehran from developing nuclear weapons capabilities. Following the U.S. withdrawal, Iran initially remained in compliance with the agreement for more than a year, according to reports from international inspectors. But as sanctions intensified and promised economic benefits failed to materialize, Tehran began gradually reducing its commitments under the deal. It increased stockpiles of enriched uranium, resumed advanced centrifuge operations, and expanded research and development activities. Now, with talks to restore or renegotiate the agreement stalled, rhetoric has hardened on all sides. Iranian officials argue that they will not negotiate under pressure and will not relinquish what they see as sovereign rights. The recent declaration that no country can deprive Iran of its nuclear enrichment rights signals a firm negotiating posture. It also serves as a message to domestic audiences, reinforcing the narrative of resistance against foreign interference. Inside Iran, the nuclear program has long been framed as a symbol of national pride and technological achievement. Leaders often portray the issue as one of dignity and independence rather than simply energy policy. For many Iranians, the memory of decades of sanctions and isolation shapes perceptions of the West's intentions. State media frequently emphasizes that Iran has endured economic hardship while maintaining its scientific progress. At the same time, the country faces significant economic challenges. Sanctions targeting oil exports, banking systems, and key industries have strained public finances. Inflation remains high, and currency volatility has affected daily life for ordinary citizens. Critics inside and outside the country argue that the nuclear standoff has come at a steep economic cost. Supporters of the government's position counter that surrendering enrichment capabilities would undermine long-term sovereignty. The regional implications are equally profound. Israel has repeatedly warned that it will not allow Iran to obtain a nuclear weapon. Israeli officials have stated that all options remain on the table, including military action. Gulf Arab states, while less vocal publicly, have expressed concern over Iran's growing influence and technological capabilities. Some analysts suggest that if Iran were to move closer to weapons capability, it could trigger a regional arms race. The United States has maintained that diplomacy remains its preferred path, but has also emphasized that it will not allow Iran to acquire a nuclear weapon. American officials continue to coordinate closely with European allies as well as with partners in the Middle East. However, the political landscape in Washington has shifted over the years, and any future agreement would face intense scrutiny and debate domestically. Meanwhile, Russia and China have positioned themselves as key players in the diplomatic arena. Both countries were original signatories to the 2015 deal and have called for a return to negotiations. Their broader strategic relationships with Iran have deepened in recent years, particularly as geopolitical rivalries with the West have intensified, energy cooperation, defense ties, and trade links have expanded, adding new layers of complexity to the nuclear issue. The International Atomic Energy Agency remains central to the unfolding situation. Its inspectors are responsible for monitoring Iran's nuclear facilities and verifying compliance with international obligations. Over recent years, disputes have arisen over access to certain sites and the scope of inspections. The agency has reported both cooperation and tensions in its engagement with Iranian authorities. For diplomats, the challenge lies in bridging a widening gap. On one side, Iran demands guarantees that sanctions will be lifted and that the United States will not withdraw from any future agreement. On the other, Western governments seek stronger and longer-lasting restrictions, along with broader discussions on regional security and missile programs. Trust once eroded is difficult to rebuild. The phrase nuclear enrichment rights itself reflects a broader legal and political debate. Under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, non-nuclear weapon states agree not to pursue nuclear weapons, but retain the right to peaceful nuclear energy under safeguards. However, enrichment technology is inherently dual use. The same process that produces fuel for power reactors can, if taken further, produce material suitable for weapons. This dual-use nature is at the heart of international concern. Iran argues that denying it enrichment capability would amount to discrimination and a violation of its treaty rights. Western officials respond that rights under the treaty are accompanied by responsibilities, including transparency and confidence-building measures to assure the world that no military dimension exists. As rhetoric intensifies, so too does the risk of miscalculation. Military analysts warn that even limited strikes on nuclear facilities could trigger a broader regional conflict. Iran has demonstrated capabilities through proxy networks and missile systems across the Middle East. Any escalation could affect shipping lanes, energy markets, and global economic stability. Oil prices have historically reacted sharply to tensions involving Iran. The country sits along the Strait of Hormuz, a critical choke point through which a significant portion of the world's oil supply passes. Disruptions or perceived threats in this region can ripple quickly through international markets. Yet, despite the heated language, diplomacy has not fully collapsed. Back channel communications reportedly continue and indirect talks have taken place in various formats. Observers note that even at moments of peak tension in the past, negotiations eventually resumed. The 2015 agreement itself was reached after years of secret contacts and public stalemates. Domestic politics in all involved countries play a decisive role. In Iran, leadership must balance hardline positions with economic realities. In the United States, any administration must consider congressional oversight and electoral dynamics. European governments, while supportive of diplomatic solutions, face their own political pressures and security considerations. Public opinion across the region is equally complex. In some countries, skepticism toward Iran's intentions runs deep. In others, there is criticism of what is perceived as Western double standards regarding nuclear capabilities. The global non-proliferation regime itself is under strain as other states observe how disputes are managed. The latest declaration from Thran can therefore be interpreted in multiple ways. It may signal preparation for prolonged resistance, or it may be a strategic move designed to strengthen bargaining leverage ahead of renewed talks. Statements of defiance often precede negotiation rounds, setting the tone for concessions that may later follow. What remains clear is that the nuclear issue is not an isolated policy debate. It intersects with regional conflicts, global power competition, energy security, and the future of international arms control frameworks. Each development reverberates beyond Thran and Washington. For now, the world watches closely. Inspectors continue their work. Diplomats weigh options. Military planners assess contingencies. Markets respond to headlines. And political leaders calculate risks and opportunities. As Iran reiterates that it will not back down from what it calls its lawful rights, the coming weeks and months will test whether firm words translate into hardened positions or renewed diplomacy. The stakes are high, not only for the Middle East, but for the broader architecture of global security. As the international debate intensifies, attention is turning to the technical realities behind the political language. Uranium enrichment is not merely a symbolic issue. It is a precise scientific process with profound strategic implications. Enrichment involves increasing the concentration of uranium-235, the isotope needed to sustain a nuclear reaction. For civilian nuclear power reactors, enrichment levels typically range between 3 and 5%. For a nuclear weapon, enrichment must reach approximately 90% purity. The gap between these levels represents not only a technical threshold, but a geopolitical fault line. In recent years, inspectors have confirmed that Iran has accumulated significant quantities of uranium enriched to levels far above those permitted under the 2015 agreement. While Thran maintains that this material is intended for peaceful purposes, Western governments argue that the reduced breakout time, the period required to produce enough weapons-grade material for a single nuclear device, has narrowed dramatically. Before the collapse of the deal, analysts estimated breakout time at more than 1 year. Today, some assessments suggest it could be measured in weeks rather than months if Iran chose to pursue that path. Iranian officials reject the notion that they are seeking nuclear weapons. They frequently cite a religious decree attributed to the country's supreme leadership, declaring such weapons forbidden under Islamic principles. Thran insists that its strategy is defensive and that it has no interest in initiating a nuclear arms race. Yet critics point out that capability itself alters strategic calculations regardless of declared intent. The International Atomic Energy Agency remains central to verifying these claims. Its reports provide much of the technical data informing global debate. Over the past several years, the agency has documented both cooperation and areas of concern, including unresolved questions about past nuclear material found at undeclared sites. Negotiations over monitoring equipment, surveillance cameras, and inspector access have become recurring flashpoints. Each dispute adds to the broader atmosphere of mistrust. Meanwhile, diplomatic channels continue to fluctuate between cautious engagement and visible stagnation. Indirect talks have taken place intermittently, often mediated by European diplomats. Proposals have included phased sanctions relief in exchange for limits on enrichment levels and stockpiles. However, key obstacles persist. Iran seeks binding guarantees that future U.S. administrations will not withdraw from any agreement, a demand that American officials argue is constitutionally complex. Washington, for its part, has pressed for stronger verification measures and discussions extending beyond the nuclear file to include regional security issues. Regional dynamics further complicate the picture. Israel has consistently framed Iran's nuclear advancements as an existential threat. Israeli leaders have publicly and privately conveyed their readiness to act independently if they perceive diplomacy to have failed. Over the years, there have been reports of covert operations targeting nuclear facilities and scientists, though such incidents are rarely acknowledged officially. The shadow conflict between Iran and Israel has unfolded across multiple arenas from cyberspace to maritime routes. Gulf states, particularly those situated across the Persian Gulf from Iran, view developments with caution. Some have pursued closer defense cooperation with the United States and other Western partners. At the same time, diplomatic openings between Iran and certain regional rivals have emerged, reflecting a pragmatic recognition that prolonged confrontation carries economic and security costs. Beyond the Middle East, global powers are recalibrating their approaches. Russia and China have criticized unilateral sanctions and emphasized dialogue. Both countries maintain strategic partnerships with Tehran, including energy projects and military cooperation. Their involvement in any future negotiation framework would likely shape both substance and tone. The broader context of strained relations between Moscow, Beijing, and Western capitals adds an additional layer of geopolitical rivalry to the nuclear dossier. Economic considerations remain a powerful driver of policy. Sanctions imposed over the past decade have targeted Iran's oil exports, financial institutions, shipping networks, and access to international markets. While Iran has developed alternative trade routes and strengthened ties with non-Western partners, economic pressure continues to affect growth, employment, and currency stability. Supporters of diplomatic engagement argue that a revived agreement could unlock economic relief and stabilize global energy markets. Skeptics counter that sanctions leverage should not be surrendered without comprehensive concessions. Energy markets, in particular, are sensitive to shifts in Iranian output. Iran holds some of the world's largest proven oil and gas reserves. Even incremental changes in its export capacity can influence global supply balances. Traders closely monitor diplomatic signals, aware that any breakthrough or breakdown can move prices swiftly. Inside Iran, public sentiment toward negotiations is complex. Some citizens, especially within urban centers and business communities, favor renewed engagement that could ease economic hardship. Others distrust Western intentions, citing historical grievances and previous unmet promises. Political factions within the country debate how much flexibility to show at the negotiating table, balancing ideological commitments with practical considerations. In Washington and European capitals, policymakers face their own political constraints. Any agreement perceived as too lenient risks criticism from opposition lawmakers and allied governments concerned about regional security. Conversely, failure to pursue diplomacy could increase the likelihood of military escalation, a scenario many leaders publicly seek to avoid. Military analysts warned that the window for preventive action, should it ever be chosen, narrows as nuclear infrastructure becomes more advanced and dispersed. Iran has invested in underground facilities and hardened sites designed to withstand airstrikes. This evolution complicates any potential military calculus and raises the stakes of misjudgment. At the same time, communication channels between adversaries, though limited, have not disappeared entirely. Crisis management mechanisms, including indirect messaging through intermediaries, remain in place. Such channels are often invisible to the public, but crucial in preventing unintended escalation. The concept of deterrence plays a significant role in strategic thinking on all sides. Iran views its technological progress as a means of strengthening its bargaining position and deterring external threats. Opponents argue that unchecked advancement could embolden regional assertiveness. The balance between deterrence and provocation is delicate and constantly shifting. International law provides both a framework and a source of contention. The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty rests on three pillars: non-proliferation, disarmament, and peaceful use of nuclear energy. Iran asserts that its enrichment activities fall squarely within the third pillar. Critics argue that the scale and speed of current enrichment exceed practical civilian needs, raising legitimate proliferation concerns. This legal and interpretive debate underpins many diplomatic exchanges. Time is another critical factor. The longer enrichment continues at elevated levels. The more material accumulates and the more complex any rollback would become. Technical reversibility exists, but political will is harder to secure. Each passing month without a formal agreement reshapes the baseline from which future negotiations would begin. Cybersecurity has also emerged as an invisible front in the nuclear dispute. Facilities linked to uranium enrichment have reportedly experienced sophisticated cyber incidents over the past decade. Such operations illustrate how modern conflicts can unfold without conventional warfare targeting infrastructure and data rather than territory. The humanitarian dimension is often overshadowed by strategic calculations. Sanctions, while aimed at government behavior, can have ripple effects on ordinary citizens. Access to certain goods, financial services, and international transactions becomes more complicated. Advocates for diplomatic compromise argue that reducing tensions could alleviate these pressures. Opponents maintain that sustained leverage is necessary to ensure meaningful compliance. As rhetoric continues, so does speculation about possible outcomes. Some analysts foresee a limited interim agreement that freezes enrichment at current levels in exchange for partial sanctions relief. Others believe only a comprehensive return to earlier limits can restore confidence. A more pessimistic outlook envisions a gradual drift toward a de facto threshold state where Iran retains advanced capabilities without formally crossing into weaponization. The international community remains divided on the appropriate response. While most governments publicly support diplomatic resolution, the degree of urgency and acceptable compromise varies. Emerging powers and non-aligned states,